Pickett. My friend and colleague John Peterson was a rocket scientist. He was one of the developers of the rocket fuel for the space shuttle at the Thiokol Proving Grounds in Utah. John was being retained by Colt Firearms at the time, making use of his expertise with explosives. He'd made a study of the German version of a supergun called the V3 weapon and wrote a white paper about it that he shared with me. His early research made him familiar with the work of a Canadian arms developer named Gerald V. Bull. Bull had also made a study of the V3 weapon and had begun working on that theme himself. The V3 weapon was a supergun that had been engineered by German scientists during the Second World War. Ironically, the barrel of the gun was partly manufactured in Britain under the guise that the smoothbore components to be used for the gun were pump parts. The gun was being set up by the Germans to be aimed at London from northern France with projectiles that could traverse the distance of more than 100 miles with the greatest of accuracy. The gun was designed with an original detonation to occur and sequential detonations to occur in a timed sequence as the projectile made its way up the barrel before launching onward. Timed sequence of detonations would accelerate the projectile with enough energy to traverse great distances before contact with the target. British intelligence became aware of the German plan and began to address a counter-objective to destroy the gun. Barnes-Wallis, the developer of a bomb that was effectively used to destroy dams, was employed to work on a solution. Wallace built a bomb called the Tall Boy with a sharp nose that would drive a short distance into the ground before detonation. The bomb was dropped on the underground compound of the supergun and was not successful in destroying the gun, but it bent the barrel enough to render it useless. When Gerald V. Bull was developing his version of the supergun in 1961, he was thinking that supergun technology could be improved and used to deliver satellites into space at a fraction of the cost of rocketry. In about 1968, Bull established a space program at Norwich University in Northfield, Vermont. However, demand by the military-industrial complex that was providing the lion's share of his funding kept his focus primarily on artillery. His peaceful plan for the development of communication satellites to be launched into orbit had to be postponed, and it suffered tremendously, and the Space Research Corporation fell into a trap and sold 50,000 artillery shells to Israel in 1973, shells that were manufactured in the United States. After being rejected by the government and the SRC, Bull looked elsewhere for support and was later convicted of illegal arms trading with South Africa and spent 4 months in an American prison in 1980. After being released, an angry Gerald Bull moved to Brussels, Belgium, known at the time to be the arms capital of the world, and he continued his search for funding to proceed with the supergun development. Unfortunately, having previously compromised for funding by military interests, he found the desired funding from a sinister source. Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi government offered funding to Bull in exchange for his expertise in artillery. Saddam was intrigued by the possibility of firing projectiles at Jerusalem, but he was skeptical of the accuracy of such a long-range gun and was afraid of damaging or destroying the Islamic Dome of the Rock. So to prove that he could, Bull made a small version of the gun in Iraq and shot a projectile 100 miles and took off the top of a mountain. Saddam was impressed and was moving forward with funding for the project before attacked by United States forces after the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York City in 2001. Although U.S. inspectors were searching Iraq for weapons of mass destruction, Whether they knew about it or not, little attention was given to the railgun project. This sinister activity led to Gerald Bull being found in March 1990 on the floor of the door of his apartment in Brussels with multiple gunshots to his head and neck. It was plainly not a robbery. He was left dead with some $40,000 in his wallet. Some speculate it was probably the doings of Israeli Mossad. As far as we know, nobody's ever been prosecuted for his murder. Bull's early work on the satellite effort, before this tragic diversion back to firearms, took place in Canada and the United States. But more space was needed, so taking advantage of an opportunity to continue with the development, he moved the operation to Barbados in the Caribbean. Early launches from Barbados were at a cost of about $5,000 each, and didn't require a battery of men and equipment to make it happen. In November 1962, numerous 350-pound projectiles were being fired at over 6,818 miles per hour and reaching altitudes of more than 40 miles. In further tests of the technology at the U.S. Army Ballistics Research Laboratory, a projectile reached an altitude of 155 miles. With rocket science on the rise and the primary focus of putting men into space caught government support with the perceived competition with Russia, a simple way of launching satellites into space with a gun was abandoned by the United States government. Keynesian economics, adopted under President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the United States to fix the Depression, is a tax and spend system. The more you tax, the more you spend, and the more you spend, the more you borrow, and the more you tax. Such was the origin of the scheme for money and power to gravitate to the top that has historically and continuously been employed by the central banks of Europe and the United States. Rocket science was extremely costly and could be romanticized and sold to an ignorant tax-paying public by the idea of putting man into space and on the moon. A gun couldn't do that. For things to be done cheaply and efficiently is not an option for the Keynesians. NASA spent $10.6 billion to develop the space shuttle with its solid rocket fuel, external tank, and engines. This included $444 million in construction costs to build the shuttle's production, launch, and processing facilities. Gerald Bull's version of the supergun was on track to send satellites into space for a small fraction of that cost. When we compare the benefits of sending humans into space with sending satellites, the economic difference is enormous in favor of the less costly methods, a supergun. Before rebelliously selling his efforts for sinister purposes, Bull joined the ranks with Pons and Fleischmann, Gary Isaacs, and others, who, although trying to economically improve the lives and costs for ordinary people by sensible innovation, were in fact interfering with the Keynesian macroeconomic model to borrow more, tax more, and spend more to artificially support economic prosperity for a time before its inevitable collapse. More about Pons, Fleischmann, and Isaacs next time. But for now, thanks for being with me today. I look forward to seeing you again in a day or two. This is Ike Pickett signing off for now. Be safe, stay righteous and charitable, and sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that a better day is coming soon and that your savings are in your own custody.
Listen to the wind in the junipers and the tales of the shifting, whispering sands. Wild horses on the run into the setting sun and the smell of the leather in his hand.